Hello. To discuss diversity in the context of the COVID crisis, we are with Todd Sears, CEO and founder of Out Leadership, the leading global LGBT business network. Todd, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Greg.
Bringing your true self at work is not so much an option these days in the COVID context. So does remote working make diversity less relevant?
Well, so the short answer is no. But a longer context is I actually think it provides new opportunity to rethink of what inclusion means, how you're connecting teams, how you're creating or disassembling hierarchy. And I'll give you a couple of thoughts of what I mean by that. So if all of your meetings are virtual, and if you think about the stereotypical context of a meeting in a boardroom where you have generally a majority figure male who is leading a meeting, and very often people with diverse perspectives don't get to raise their opinions or get to actually make their thoughts known in a meeting. Virtually, that hierarchy, if you do it as a Zoom meeting, for example, that hierarchy is taken away, right? Because everybody's square is the exact same size and everybody is participating in the same meeting. And it actually, and I've heard this from several companies and a number of leaders, has created an opportunity for more voices to be heard because of the nature of that Zoom call. And I've actually heard from several folks from a board perspective who have actually said post-COVID, they don't actually plan to go back to in-person meetings because when you take away the in-person dynamic, you take away a lot of the hierarchies and a lot of the different sort of human elements that are at play that are not positive. Obviously, everyone misses the human interaction and we will look forward to having that again. But there's some really interesting positives, I think, that have come out of the opportunity to be virtual. And I kind of look at this crisis in that way across all levels of not just diversity, but across business. I think it forces companies to think about what does matter. And from a time perspective, how employees are spending their time and how leaders are spending their time. And rethinking how you sort of engage with your clients and your employees. So I do think that inclusion matters now as much, if not more than ever. I think that the current situation creates opportunities for companies to rethink how they're connecting with their employees and supporting their employees.
Very interesting. So have you seen any good examples of what leaders can do to be more inclusive?
Yes, I have. And so I think I'll put it in a context broadly. What I've been excited to see, and if you think about, so we're all Skyping today from homes or empty offices. And at any given time, I don't know if you have kids, but I know Greg does. At any given time, Greg's kiddos could walk through or cry, or my dog could bark and interrupt. And think about that in the context of how everyone wants to be incredibly professional, right? Everyone's Facebook picture is perfect and everyone's Instagram shows a beautiful life. And we really sanitize ourselves in a business situation, right? We're always dressed up. I specifically didn't wear a white shirt today because I can't. I could wear plaid, right? And if you think about that has been the old mode, right? And I love your white shirt, Greg. So nothing against white shirts, but you think about the sort of walls that have been broken down because of that, the humanity that is now on display. And to the point of leaders who embrace that, I think are showing a much more interesting side to themselves and are connecting with people, right? I've done so many interviews with CEOs and their kids are doing homework in the background and their dog barks, right? And if you think about just 2 months ago, they would have never permitted that, right? They would have made sure their kids were gone, but they can't now. They would have made sure that the background was perfect because they would have been in their office and it would have been climate controlled and perfectly quiet. And so the idea that all of the veneer has been stripped away because of this and we're just humans, I think has been a really interesting opportunity for people to see what a leader really looks like in a very different context, right? You see the CEO of HSBC doing a webcast from his home. You would have never seen his home prior to this. And that's a really interesting sort of human piece. The second piece to that same thing is that what I think is happening is that all of the areas of our lives that we compartmentalized before this crisis, you are no longer able to compartmentalize, right? So your kids are home if you have kids. If you have an elderly parent that you're taking care of, that person may be living with you. That may actually impact your ability to go out because you don't want to potentially transmit a disease, even if you're not sick with it, to an elderly person who's now living with you. All of the sort of outside of work pressures that prior to this, we were able to not just compartmentalize, but keep out of view you no longer can, at least for this period of time. And so what I think great leaders are doing is acknowledging that, owning that, laughing about that, right? A CEO that's being interviewed and his kid's crying in the background, and you're like, hey, I've got a 4-year-old, and boy, is it hard to be a CEO and a homeschool teacher. I'm not good at it, right? That humanizes that leader in ways that we would have never seen before. But the other thing that I think good leaders are doing is understanding the pressures that creates on their employees, because this is an incredibly stressful time for people. Just taking what I just said, the merger of the elements of your life that you were no longer able to compartmentalize, that alone is massive stress. Then having it on display, not everybody's comfortable with that. That is a whole new piece to this. So that adds a level of stress. Not to mention, where's the economy going? Am I going to have my job? And oh, by the way, there's a disease that could kill me. Right? Lots of layers of stress, most of it invisible right now. And so good leaders are acknowledging that and finding ways to de-stress. So I think there are a lot of things that leaders can do and should be thinking about. And it does kind of boil down to empathy, right? I do think that the best leaders are empathetic leaders. And we can talk about the LGBT component to that. But having empathy for your employees and seeing how every single one of them has stress that they didn't have before, they will be handling it differently. And then as they think about returning to work, that's going to be the final piece of this, right? How are companies going to navigate what will be a very challenging thing for people?
And if we step back and rewind before this whole episode, and think of corporations trying their best to make to be more diverse and inclusive places, where did you see the most progress in the recent years?
Well, I think, I was chatting with one of our leadership podcasts a few weeks ago. For context, I was talking to the COO of RBC. And we were talking about, I asked him to reflect back on prior crises, right? The financial crisis, 2008, SARS, all the way back. He's been in business for 40 years on Wall Street. And we both agreed that the ability of companies to weather this crisis, to support their employees, and to come out ahead is vastly different now because of what companies have done with diversity and inclusion. And if you sort of think about that, we can kind of unpack that. If you think about the fact that 15 years ago, this was not a major topic on anybody's radar. Some companies said it, but nobody really lived it. We were not focusing on corporate responsibility as a part of anything, right? Companies would just make their profit, and that was what they did. 2020, how companies behave in the world is of utmost importance. People pay attention to it. You can't act as a different actor in London than you do in New York, than you do in Hong Kong, right? Because of social media and the digital world, you have to be a global citizen as an organization. And diversity is obviously part of that. But I think because companies have been focusing on how they treat their employees, how they recruit, how they retain, the war for talent leading into this, and I think still exists, by the way, I think all of those elements have made this a much more survivable crisis than if we had had this crisis 15 years ago. I think we would be in a much worse shape on so many levels. And so pre-crisis, I think a lot of the work that I saw that was exciting, that was happening, was innovation around this. I think understanding that diversity, inclusion, and truthfully, and I know we've chatted about this over the years, I'd love to get rid of the terms diversity and inclusion because they're so loaded, right? They're generally negative. They're generally compliance driven. They're not opportunity focused always. And people have if I say diversity, every single human that hears that has any corporate engagement has a viewpoint that engenders some kind of thought. And it's generally not massively positive. For a straight white male, it could mean everybody but me. For a woman, it could mean, oh, you're only hiring me because of my gender, not because of my skills. So really focusing more on leadership and inclusive leadership and belonging. And those concepts, I think, are what companies who have been at the forefront have really been doing, and shifting away from counting belly buttons. How many women do I have? How many Black people do I have? How many gay people do I have? To how do I have the best, brightest workforce that can solve problems, innovate, and deliver for clients? And if I have that, of course, it's going to be a mix of all of those things. But that mix is the output, not the starting point. And so I think companies that have thought about it in that way have already seen results, and I think will weather the storm significantly better than those who have not.
And do you think, therefore, we're at a sort of point of no return, and we can be optimistic that we're going towards this type of truly inclusive place?
Look, I mean, as you probably remember, I'm the eternal optimist, so I will always see the glass half full. And I do think it is the point of no return, in the sense that it will be very, very hard for companies to completely go away from diversity and inclusion. I do think we will see some backsliding in the next 6 to 9 months, 12 months, primarily because of just financial forces, and companies really will have to make hard choices in terms of keeping employees, et cetera. But I do also, in that exact same moment, think that companies who are being smart about that can leverage what they have done in this space to treat employees humanely and fairly, and really thinking about how. There was an article this morning about Airbnb CEO laying off some people, and the manner in which he did it was kind. And it was focused on taking care of the employees and ultimately making them still feel like they belong to the Airbnb family. And hopefully when things change, they can come back, right? All of those terms and that framing is really just what diversity and inclusion is meant to create. It's meant to create that sense of belonging for everyone so that you feel a part of something. So I think companies, even though they will have to have reductions in force, can do it in a smart way, because markets will come back. This is not the end of the world. This will end. This is not, you're already seeing, Hong Kong, a lot of people are already starting to go back to work. I understand some of London is unlocking. The States is a different issue because we have some challenging to underscore it, or, challenging leadership at the top. But even the States will figure this out. Humans are way too smart. And I think the collaboration, I think that's probably my final point on this, the collaboration we're seeing across industries, take the pharmaceutical industry, right? The collaboration you're seeing among the major pharmaceutical companies to try to find a cure/vaccine and increase testing, et cetera, is something that we would have never seen before. And I'm interested to see, I do think that is creating new structures for working together after this is all over.
So I think this evolution of the meaning of diversity and inclusion towards collaboration and almost more humanity, as you said, is fascinating. And I just want to reflect also on our experience of all going through this crisis together, which in a way gives us a greater sense of community. So my question, Todd, is, do you believe that as a result of the crisis, we will have the emergence of a more balanced leadership, more inclusive type of leadership, and in what ways?
So the short answer is yes. I absolutely think that we will. And I love that you call out the fact that we are all going through this. There has never been a time, I don't think, in living history that this is any sort of collective experience has happened. Right. And so for me personally, living in New York City through 9/11, I remember that the whole world came to New York's aid, and there was this beautiful time of, we are New York. And it was this really wonderful moment, but it was just about New York, and everybody else sort of felt sorry for New York and helped. Right. But that was not a collective moment that everyone felt the same thing or experienced the same thing. And so, if you think back, just take this, may be an odd comparison, but it just comes to mind. There's research around television, and how in the 80s, when television was just sort of your general channels, people would watch one show and it was at the same time, right? I mean, I'm sure there was a show in France that you grew up watching, that everybody watched it on a Friday night, and it was a collective experience, right? And we no longer have that. There is no such thing. People will watch Netflix and they say, oh, watch that series. And then you go and you watch it on your own time. There's no collective moment that we have as a society any longer. There's no, the next morning after the show, everyone's at the water cooler talking about it. There are very few of those. And that we are tribal as humans. We want to connect to our fellow humans. And I do think that going through this is creating that universal connection. We will all remember how we had to wear masks, and we will all remember how we had to have that fear. And we will all remember friends who were either sick or died, or friends who made it through just fine. And we'll all understand how our lives have changed. And I do think that it will make, think of, there was a great little video from Tom Foolery that I saw going around. I don't know if you guys saw it, but it talks about the potential positives coming out of this. And if you look at the pollution levels in India dropping to, on a measure of 200, they used to be in the 180s and now they're 16, and the oceans healing them, just the planet itself healing itself. The idea of humanity as part of that and healing some of the pieces that we went into this much more fractured. And if we can come out of it understanding this collective experience has brought us more together, has created a common bond and a shared common experience. That's ultimately what any of these programs are meant to try to do in companies, is create shared common experience that connect humans. And so I absolutely think that what we're going to see coming out of this is this shared common experience. Now, the question will be, what will people do with it? Mm-hmm. And 6 months after, how will people try to go back to the old ways, or will people really embrace what this sort of new reality is? And I think that still remains to be seen.
A core value in the Out Leadership Network is the return on equality. Does that take a much broader meaning in the post-COVID world then?
So to define return on equality, the idea that I had was that companies, by engaging in LGBT equality and leveraging their global platforms to advocate for LGBT equality from an economic model perspective, saying discrimination is bad for business, and as an economic engine in this country, in this state, in this city, my company has a vested interest in seeing that LGBT people have full equality. That's the idea of return on equality, because it does then translate into better profits, into better business, obviously into better humanity. But that idea is that companies should and can expect a return on equality by advocating for LGBT inclusion. And so I don't think the equation changes at all. I think that if you see just this week or next week in the United States, we will have a Supreme Court ruling that will determine whether LGBT people can be fired for being simply LGBT. I'm sure you remember, in 28 states in the United States, or 27 now, Virginia passed a non-discrimination bill a month ago. In 27 states currently, you can still legally be fired for being gay. And 34 states, you can legally be fired for being transgender. And so if you think about that as one example, and in still 67 countries, it's still illegal to be gay. That has not changed post-COVID. That will only change through collective action of the companies that are members of Out Leadership. We now have 82 companies that are global members of the organization. And the advocacy work that we have been doing the last 10 years, and this is our 10th anniversary, will continue, and just has to find new forms, because the court cases against the LGBT community are continuing, not just in the United States, but around the world, Singapore, et cetera. And, in some ways, maybe there is a new approach. Maybe there's a new method post-COVID from a virtual perspective, and making sure information flow is greater than it was going into the crisis. But I do think that the basic equation of return on equality, that companies do better business when their employees can be included and are not discriminated against, will absolutely not change.
So how do we create momentum? How do we capitalize on this experience that we all lived with COVID-19? I guess, leaders have to inspire change in people and culture, and that's not easy. So what would be some of your thoughts on that?
Well, I think the first is to acknowledge that it's not easy. I think you're exactly right. Mm-hmm. I think understanding that nobody has all the answers right now, but that everybody's trying. Because I think at the very core leadership skills, in my opinion, are honesty, transparency, and empathy, right? And as a leader, you have to be able to say, I don't know what's happening in the future. All I know is what's right now. Transparently, here's what I am doing about it, and here's how we're going to move forward. And I want to be empathetic to you as my employees and my clients. I want to make sure that I'm hearing you and I'm supporting you. So that's kind of the first thought. In terms of how we create momentum with that, I think there is huge opportunity from an innovation perspective, right? If you think about the wheels of the world slowing down and in some cases stopping, people's brains haven't stopped. People's ideas haven't stopped. The innovations that people are churning on hasn't stopped. And quite frankly, a silver lining to all of the shutdowns is that it's forcing people to take time. And a lot of people are using that time, in my opinion. And I think if I had to make a prediction, in several months, we're going to see a huge takeoff. I think all of the great minds that have been forced to sort of be quiet, or not be quiet, but take this time, have been innovating and churning. I mean, I can speak for Out Leadership. In the last 6 weeks, we will have done more content, created more content, more conversations, advocated more for equality than we did in the last 6 months of 2019. Because we've taken that time and innovated and have not let it slow it down. We've actually said, okay, we can't do it this way. We could do it this way. Oh, wow, this way we could do even more. Let's get people excited about that and engage people, because people at their core, I think, want positivity. I think people want a way forward. I think they want forward motion. And so I think the companies, to create that momentum, the companies that are doing that are creating that momentum, and people are going to gravitate toward it. It is so easy to look at the news and despair and think, oh God, COVID cases increased and And for me, just from a leader perspective, I read the headlines once a morning and that's it. And I spend 5 to 7 minutes on it. And then I say, okay, I have a lot of work to do and we're doing a lot of great stuff. And I'm not going to let that drag me down, because it's completely out of my control. I cannot control COVID. I can control my company. I can't control what my employees feel and how they feel about the work that they're doing. And I can control, ideally, how we communicate and what output we create. And so I think that momentum, at least that we're creating, I am seeing in other companies as well. And I think that's how we'll get out of this. And the companies that can do that will succeed, and the companies that can't will have some challenges.
So now I'm asking the optimistic you described earlier. So what happens in the next few years in your dream scenario?
The next few years with what? Without leadership, with the world, with give me some parameters.
In our discussion of what we still call diversity and inclusion in the corporate world, I guess,
Yeah, what happens in the next few years? Well, I would like, so dream scenario, right? To use your word. So dream scenario, I would love to think that we come back from this from a hierarchy perspective being less important. I think the idea of virtual work, if you think about 3 months ago, if you had surveyed secretly, anonymously, every Fortune 500 CEO and their senior management team and asked them, what do you think about remote work? Do you think remote work would actually work for your companies? I know we do it because we let women go home to have a baby, right? We've done it for people as an accommodation. That's really how remote work has always been viewed by the vast majority of companies, right? If you ask those CEOs and those leaders 3 months ago before this crisis, they would probably all say, yeah, it's okay for some folks. I know we have to do it for these reasons, but I could never do it. And most of my employees couldn't do it. We could never have virtual work. 98% of Goldman Sachs employees right now are remote. And Goldman's doing great. I'm just using them as an example, right? And so one of the things that's going to, I think, be an outcome of this is you will no longer be able to say it's impossible to do virtual work. That is an argument that is completely 100% dead. And that's a huge culture shift, right? Because something that was once seen as an accommodation is now a potential foundational way for companies and leaders to work. Think about the freedom that provides. So 3 years from now, James Gorman from Morgan Stanley said he doesn't know what Morgan Stanley's footprint is going to look like in 12 to 18 months, but he knows it's going to be smaller, right? So think about that from an inclusion perspective and what that means from a connection perspective, how companies can be more efficient. And if you're more efficient, how can you innovate in a better way and redeploy resources? I mean, if you don't have to tie up so much of your resource in a huge building, imagine what you could do with it, right? So in 2 to 3 years, I'd be very excited to see how companies have taken the learnings from this, how companies have taken the free capital that it could create for them, how they're going to take the innovation that's been created because of this situation. And I think the loyalty that employees are showing to their companies that treat them well, all of those to me bode well for something really good coming out of it from a diversity perspective, but just more of a human perspective. Because I do think, as I said before, ultimately it is about humans and how humans connect. And the reason we even have these programs is because we have siloed people and we have excluded people. And it's harder and harder to exclude people if everything is virtual or if you're rethinking how you're engaging with them. So the dream scenario would be that we're much more inclusive. I would love to see so many of these programs just go by the wayside because we don't need them anymore, right? Too often we've had 35 years of, in very many cases, bad diversity and inclusion because it's focused on the problem, not the opportunity. And it's just focused on race and gender, and we value difference. So we say, I don't have enough of this and I have too much of that. And you get the message that if you're the too much of generally straight white men, that you don't matter because you're not quote unquote diverse. And then if you are quote unquote diverse, woman, person of color, LGBT, the only thing that matters is an immutable characteristic that has nothing to do with your skills. So we've created this value inequity in our companies by doing it that way. And so if all of these things could ultimately result in that value inequity going away, that would be a dream scenario.
And how about the dream scenario for our leadership then?
Oh, that I'm on a beach somewhere and everybody else is doing the work.
Todd, thanks very much. I think that was gold. That was a very very rich download. We're going to have to digest that. Fabian, did you have any?
No, I love the shift of emphasis away from diversity and inclusion towards, collaboration and connection, human connection. I think this is such an inspiring meaning. What should be the new label, though? I mean, if we are not, if we accept that diversity and inclusion is not the right way to actually talk about this, I mean, what would be some of your thoughts?
I would say leadership and belonging, right? Because everybody wants to be a leader, and there's no negative, pejorative nature to that. There's no, it's a positive connotation. And belonging, ultimately, there are different folks who say that there's diversity, then there's inclusion, then there's belonging, right? And inclusion, the idea of diversity is that it's, if you're at a school dance, diversity of the people at the dance, right? And inclusion is being in the room at the dance, but belonging is getting asked to dance.
Very nice.